So, what has COVID changed? Well, the most obvious thing is work. Um, I work for the health board in strategic planning, and it's largely a desk job. Well, actually, mostly a meeting people job, but not frontline, and can definitely be done remotely. So, I work part time, and before all of this, I used to be in. I worked 3 days a week. I used to be in the board somewhere, at least 2 of those days, because of I work with people all across the board. Then sometimes I was out at St John's Hospital. Sometimes I could be in the centre of town at Waverley Gates, other time at the Royal, all over the place really, even in East Lothian. And a lot of what I did for a living was travel around to go to meetings, because when you're trying to persuade people to do things, then going to them sets you off on a good start. So that's what I did. And then because we are in strategic planning, part of our job is to see what's coming and predict the future, I guess. And so about a week before we were all locked down, my boss said to us, find a way to stop coming in, just work from home for a few weeks until this all blows over. So it was the Monday after the Prime Minister had told the old folks they had to stay at home. And I went into the office, I picked up my laptop and did a few things and came home, and that I've still not been back. So, to start with, everything was frantic. The IT infrastructure was not ready and able to cope, both in terms of work's IT infrastructure, but just the general country's IT infrastructure, I think. I could spend a good 2 hours in the morning trying to get in, and then if I didn't sort of press a keystroke for too long, then it would kick me out again. It was absolutely horrific, and in part that was our poor Wi-Fi. So I actually ended up doing a lot of what I did on using the SIM card, so racking up a right bill there, which I got a knuckle wrap for, but it was the only way I could do any work. And I was pretty much taken off my day job, which is maternal and infant nutrition and other things up to school age for children. And I was put on supporting the chief nurses, the community chief nurses, and the Child Health Commissioner in helping health visitors redesign their service overnight. And obviously the chief nurses are completely capable of doing that, but there are 4 across Lothian, and they all had slightly different ways of doing it. And the guidance was changing so fast in those early days. So you get something coming from government, and then you'd have to make sure it was in the right place, the decision makers' hands, and then you'd have to go back round them going, yeah, but you now need to decide once for Lothian what we're doing, so get your heads together. And then you'd have to help them disseminate that. And there are so many health visitors across Lothian, and so you'd think they all had the same message. And then one of the GP practices in, I don't know, Broxburn or somewhere would change what the health, say, no, we're not letting health visitors in our practice unless they're doing X, Y, and Z. And so they would suddenly make them wear a surgical, a proper full-on mask rather than just the normal surgical ones. And by lunchtime, they'd have heard about it down in, North Berwick, and they'd be going, oh, the West Lothian health visitors need to wear that, why don't we? And you just spent days on days firefighting. So that's what we did originally. And then we got to a point where things calmed down a bit, and we sort of settled into COVID, I guess. And we found a way to make the service work largely remotely, and we agreed what absolutely couldn't be done remotely, and people found out more about the disease and things relaxed a bit. Not loads, but enough that you could go, okay, well, we're all right doing this. And I could start to think about doing my day job. And yeah, and then my day job was different because no longer was I going to everyone. I could just Teams them, and never even heard of Teams before COVID, and now that was what I do. And now I get a lot more actual work done, and by which possibly not as much gets seen on the ground, but I write more papers and there is more actual output. So there we are, and now I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back to the office, and they're talking about a reopening of the office in August. And I misspoke when I said that I hadn't been back since that Monday. I've been back once since, because we were told to empty the office. So I've had to empty my drawers and everything. Anything personal is gone. They're turning blocks of 6 into 2 hot desks. And when they open the doors, probably in August, we will be able to return. Yeah, about 1/3 of us can go back in. So I don't want to go back. I don't want to use public transport at the moment, and it cost a lot of money. It's saving me £35 a week not catching the train from Dunbar to Edinburgh and back. And I'm at home, and I was allowed to move my hours around to fit childcare, and that's still being allowed at the moment. And it was a bit extreme at one point when my husband had to work and my daughter wasn't at nursery. It was crazy. And so I was doing a 12-hour day and 2 really short days after she'd gone to bed. Awful. I'm not doing that anymore, but they still aren't traditional working hours. And I recognise that at some point it's not going to be okay for me to work from when I fall out of bed until the schools until I need to leave to pick my daughter up from school, because that really isn't aligned to a time other people work. But I'm getting the work done. But even without that, I will still be more on hand, more flexible, more able to fit around childcare, or not even have childcare, as is the case at the moment. So yeah, I don't want to work in an office maybe ever again. So we will see. Talking of that, school. So when the first lockdown came, our daughter was 4, and she was in 2 nurseries, the school nursery, and they had them in 4 mornings a week, and the private nursery that supplemented the childcare on the 3 days a week when I worked. Sorry, on the 2 days, because my husband's consolidated his hours, so he only works 4 days a week, but longer hours. So the private nursery for 2 afternoons till tea time when I could get in, and then suddenly they were shut. And that was weird as well, because they were like, oh, we don't know. First of all, they rang round to say we're staying open. And then over the course of the week, they rang round and said, we're not staying open, but you work for the NHS and your husband works for the council, so it's okay. You're essential workers. And then they rang around going, no, you're not. So yeah, all of a sudden there was no school, there was no nursery. And the school nursery, which shut, the public nursery shut, and they kind of knew that was, they had a week, and they kind of knew that was happening. I think we all kind of knew it wasn't going to open again until after the summer. There was talk that it might be open after Easter, but I think I think most people knew that wouldn't happen, and to the point that they sent them home with all of their sort of folder of things that they'd done and assessments and stuff. So, and they were taking things down off the walls to send them home with. So I think they knew, and I remember going and picking her up and being quite tearful, and saying goodbye to her nursery teachers, and they were fighting. You know, they had tears in their eyes too, and we all did. But the kids didn't, because the kids didn't know and didn't understand, and they knew it was their last day of nursery, but I don't think last ever really kind of, didn't. But it was the last day of nursery ever, and then we weren't homeschooling because there was no schoolwork for nursery kids. And at 4, I guess some 4-year-olds can be left to do things, but not my Beth. No, she you couldn't leave her to do anything, even popping the telly on, and putting her favourite film or programme on. But she wasn't a kid who was brought up on much telly, so she really didn't settle into that either, and we both really struggled. I struggled because my husband was still having to go out to work, because he's a community warden, and they still had them out there doing things. They were helping the food bank, they were they were supporting COVID restrictions, they were doing a variety of different things, so they were out, and so it was me and Beth in the house for very long days, trying to work, so I said he consolidated he did that when I went back to work after she was born, so that on a Monday, which he doesn't work, that was my 12-hour day to try and do useful work that I was paid to do. And then everything else I was trying to fit round, and his work must just about 1 minute he was allowed to work from home for some of the mornings, then he wasn't, then he was, but they were checking in on him to make sure he was actually working, and acted like they didn't believe him, and he had to get the union involved to get them to stop chopping and changing, and it was absolutely messing us about. And then, so we had all of that, and I was still trying to look after a 4-year-old, a very sociable 4-year-old who suddenly, she's an only child. She had no one to play with for months at the beginning. It was just horrible. And yeah, so, again, I sort of envisaged when all the food went out of the shops and you could see the panic buying, and I kind of knew in my waters we weren't going back to school until after the summer holiday. We had some money set aside for, I don't know, the first a musical instrument or something, money that we'd been given as a birthday present for her, and in a bank account, and I bought a climbing frame and slide, and we had quite a small garden, so this took up about a third of it, but I ordered it and it got delivered in 2 weeks, and still the best purchase we made, because that, trying to find things to do, we were really lucky with the weather, but yeah, there were no structured activities we were being given. You were relying on, Joe Wicks to try and get some exercise in her, and that hour a day that you were allowed out, my goodness, we were clamouring at the door every single day. We went for an hour's walk, just to change the scenery, because the 4 walls were just coming in at you. And one of the things that Dunbar, I'm sure loads of places did, but Dunbar did, was people were painting stones and leaving them on walls, and everyone put rainbows in their windows. And it was great for her age group, because it was really something you could get them looking out for and to get them interested in the walk. Because, yeah, what can you do? We painted, we played outside, we planted things that failed to grow, but it was something to do. We did a lot of baking, She's always liked baking, we've always liked it, but suddenly we were in together all the time. And I put a timetable up on the fridge, and it wasn't something that we could stick to, but it just had pointers that you could go, what, when you were going, what on earth could we do? It had sort of creative, craft, physical, and just headings like that. Letters, or imaginative, all different types of play, stories, so that I could just go, gosh, what haven't we done today? And we could go down and go, oh look, we haven't done any sensory play today. Let's get some water out and do things like that, just because otherwise I just don't know. I just wasn't set up to, and your brain was going fuzzy anyway, so that's what we did. And then there were play parks opened again, and they were allowed to see each other again, and even though they couldn't go into each other's houses, it was amazing, and then that was great. And then they went to school, and I'll talk about that in a minute or two, but then that was, we were delirious. That was amazing. That was suddenly, you had adult time again, because there just wasn't adult time to start with, because you had a 4-year-old needing your attention the whole time, who couldn't play unassisted for more than about 20 minutes. And I used to send her and go, right, Mummy needs 20 minutes now. You need to go into the garden and play on your own. And I felt horrible doing that, but I was going insane. And I think a lot of parents were. So, yeah, then they went to school, and suddenly you had space to think. And I wasn't, with the hours I was working and then looking after the house and then shopping, and shopping became a marathon, and just everything that you needed to do. By the time she went to sleep, your brain was done for the day, and we'd just sort of sit there and blankly stare at a telly for a little bit and then collapse and go to bed, and it became Groundhog Day. You just didn't know what was going on. So then going back to school was amazing. There was time to talk to other adults. There was space to think. So yeah, that was great. And she started school, and it was amazing, but it was also really hard for those of us whose children started school in COVID, because it wasn't, they didn't know what school was supposed to be like. So what it is like is normal for them, and the school have tried so hard to make it cool, and you couldn't show that fear or that sadness to them, because it would have made it worse for them. But for us, it was. For us, knowing that they wouldn't be able to mix, that we weren't even sure. At one point, we were watching pictures coming in from Europe of children having to play outside on their own in circles drawn in the playground, and I was like, if we do that, I'm not sending them. It wasn't like that, but they did have to stay in their class bubbles, and we were worried they wouldn't be allowed to touch the teacher, or they wouldn't be able to, but that wasn't so bad, and the teachers did hold their hand, and within the bubble I think they kind of did allow them to, do whatever, lick each other. I don't not that literally, but they do that if you let them at that age. So that was that, and then of course came the second lockdown, and then we got the opportunity and the joy of homeschooling, and that was stressful. It was a year on nearly, so she had a little bit more ability to play on her own, and we were a year on and had a little bit more ability to just be hardline, and that really messed with my husband's head. So lockdown 1, I was the one who had to go to the doctor and get anti-anxiety medication, and I wasn't sleeping, and I had real problems then, and I held it together, but not really, not by a normal standard, just by a COVID standard. But when they didn't go back after the Christmas holiday, and Keith went to a virtual meeting at work, and they started asking questions about childcare arrangements, and both of us could see it all happening again. And he didn't cope. So he ended up off with depression. So then we were locked in again, with me coping slightly better and my work being slightly easier, but with trying to homeschool a 5-year-old. And again, you can't homeschool a 5-year-old next to you. Slightly older children, maybe you can give them a task and they do it next to you while you do your work. But a 5-year-old, if you want them to write the thing, you have to sit next to them and go, and that's right, and what letter comes after K? That's right, A. What does an A look like? Well done. And now a T. And we struggled with that. And we did, but I think part of it was our own thing as well, because they were giving us this work and we felt like we would be letting Beth down if we didn't do the work that we'd been given, and she'd fall behind, which, the teachers were all going, do what you could do and don't put yourself under too much stress, but it's difficult to not do it. And some people I know did. Some people just went, I'm actually not doing a single thing. Or some people went, I'm going to do the reading and the writing, and that's me. But we didn't feel like we could do that. It was a little bit easier though, because although it was very cold, we could still go to the parks. And so there's an amazing park in Dunbar that has literally saved our life. I am quite certain of that. Lauderdale Park, and we could go up there and she could play with her friends, and that was allowed. So we didn't go back to her in complete social isolation, which was brilliant. And you could arrange for friends of hers to be up there at the same time, and then us mums could sort of sit not too close to each other, with close enough to shout but not whisper, with a mug of coffee, and we did that. So even that enabled me to get a bit of socialisation, which was great as well. So yeah, but the thing that was going back to them starting school, the thing that is really still upsets me is that us parents lost that. We lost the first day that we had thought we would have. We took them we weren't allowed to stand in the playground and hold their hand and meet their teacher. I still feel like I don't know her teacher, and that's her first year, because I never spoke to her face to face. Only a few times on the phone, and a couple of parents' evenings on a Zoom call. One parent evening, in fact. You couldn't catch them in the playground. That first day when we dropped them off, we couldn't meet up afterwards. You just the first day you drop your child off, particularly your first one, because you've not hardened your heart to it, at school, that's your baby, and you know that you're letting them go, and this is the start of them leaving you. And we just had to do it with a smile on our face, and then we couldn't see other parents afterwards. We couldn't go for a coffee in a little weep. We had to go home on our own, and that was hard. And we didn't get to go to any assemblies with them this year, and they didn't have a nativity play. The school did so much great for the kids for Christmas, but the parents missed that. And we didn't get to go to their first sports day. They did that, and they didn't even tell us when it was, so that we couldn't show up and just be there at the gate anyway and watch it anyway, because I'm sure I would have done, and I'm sure others would have done. And Beth's our only child, and she'll be our only child because we had fertility problems. And so all of the thoughts I've had about being a parent my whole life, right from when I was a little girl, they're all wrapped up in her. And there's only one run through, and COVID's taken some of those from me, and I'll never get those back. But there we go. In many ways, we're very lucky. I mean, I've talked about the anxiety I suffered and the depression my husband suffered, and how the stress of us, the stress we put on her and her loss of her peers affected Beth. And you can tell it affected her. She's become more angry. She never used to be angry. I mean, and we're working through it with her, and we're naming big emotions, and, you know, she's not violent or anything, but she has outbursts, and she wasn't that kid. And her continence has gone backwards as well. She was fully potty trained and dry the whole time. But now we're having a lot of accidents. So this summer we're working on that. But yeah, there's, you know, we all suffered from mental health problems because of COVID. But in many respects we were lucky in that we know no one who's died from it. We know no one who's gone to hospital with it even. My granddad got it. He's 100. He turned 100 in April. So he was 99 at the time, and he had a fall, and it landed him in hospital, as it does for 99-year-olds. He still lives at home. He's got a carer that comes in, but he lives at home on his own. And he had a fall, and that landed him in hospital. And in hospital he caught COVID, and we were all just beside ourselves. But he got over it. Goodness alone knows how, but he did. So we have been very lucky when it comes to that. And we've been lucky in other things. We moved in the middle of COVID, can you believe? When all of this started, we had arranged to buy the house I'm now sat in. It's a new build house, so you sign all of the paperwork and everything, and then they finish building it and give it to you. And that was supposed to happen before Easter, and clearly it didn't. So yeah, we were in this 2-bedroom house that felt far too small for the three of us, with a tiny garden. Now, I can't imagine what it was like living in a city, in a tower block, away from your nearest park, but that house felt small, and it wasn't a house we liked. You know, it was a house that we needed at the time. It was the right fit at the right time. But this was the house I wanted, and I knew it was coming. And so we used to use a lot of our hourly 1 hour a day walks to walk up here and just look at it. And then we moved. We were able to move when things relaxed in the summer. And it was weird moving in COVID and having movers come in, and you were worrying about, well, what do you do? And you've got lots of people coming in and out of your house, and we just had to go, right, this week we are accepting the risk, because what else could you do? I mean, we couldn't bleach everything down because we were very risk averse. One of the things that set me off was supermarkets and how the food insecurity was, you know, when I first left education, I had a rubbish job. And I lived with a flatmate who also had a rubbish job, and we could barely make rent. So then we had food insecurity, but it felt like we were almost more in control of that because we had a budget. We knew where the cheapest shops were in town. We knew where to go and And we knew the money was coming in. It wasn't enough money, but we knew it was coming in, and we managed that, and we were okay. But this was a different kind of food insecurity because, I mean, we're not rich or anything, but we're reasonably well off. But suddenly there wasn't food. And you go to the shops and the stuff that you wanted to buy wasn't there. And I had a list, and I would go out every day and go to a shop, a different shop, because I didn't want to spread from shop to shop. But it's like, okay, today I'm trying Asda, tomorrow I'm going to try Co-op, today, the day after I'm going, and I just had things that were, if you see any yeast, you must buy yeast, because we were struggling to, like, the bakers was, thank goodness for the bakers, they were open so we could get bread, but they weren't open every day, and so to try and make bread because baker's bread doesn't last as long, to try and make breads on the off days, but there wasn't always yeast, and there wasn't always bread flour, there wasn't always flour, and the whole toilet roll. And I've always kept a few extra things in, my food cupboard's never bare. There's always been, all things that I use regularly. So there's always extra tins of tomatoes and sweet corn and stuff. But I hadn't got like a zombie apocalypse cupboard like some people have, but I do now. I've got a box that has tinned goods enough to feed the four of us for about a week. I mean, you wouldn't be happy about it, but you'd be able to eat 3 meals a day for 7 days with what's in that box, because I just couldn't cope with it. And then I couldn't cope with going in, and some people just didn't care. And this was before we could all had to wear masks. So people would be like leaning over you or going the wrong way down, and you just became more and more anxious. And in the end, and you couldn't get food deliveries either. And then you could get food deliveries, but you had to wake up at midnight 3 weeks in advance to book them. And it was crazy. And I just, as a mum and as the sort of person who does that part of the running of the house, I was just obsessed the whole time of how am I feeding my family, and I didn't cope. So my friends sat me down, so it was a bit further along by then. We must have been allowed out to go and have our coffees in Lauderdale Park, so the cafe was doing takeaways by then, when they sat me down and went, it's okay to stay out of the supermarkets, it's okay to book a delivery every week, because I felt I couldn't do that because I was taken away from people who really needed it, and they were like, yeah, but you really need it because you're not actually functioning. So, because supermarkets set you off. So, yeah, and we were really risk averse. We were one of the people who were washing our shopping. We've stopped that now. And moving into the new house did that. because you couldn't wash down the walls that other people had painted and things, and by then the evidence showed that actually transmission was more from breath and people breathing on you and you breathing in it than it was from touching. And so as long as you did normal, you didn't have to leave things. So although that could do it, it was less likely to. So yeah, it was that late that we stopped doing that. But we moved in COVID, and now we've got this lovely house and it's much bigger. And that became its own problem as well, because then it became winter. So the weather was bad. So we'd had a lovely time. We've moved in, we've unpacked, we've nested in my house, and I'm happy. And then this Christmas that we thought we might have, that didn't happen, that broke everybody's hearts. I don't think there's anyone who didn't cry at some point over that Christmas and New Year of all the things they'd lost and the people they couldn't be with and the plans that they'd made that had to be cancelled. It was just horrible. So that came along, and that got me on a low. And then the weather was bad. so it was difficult to go out, and I slipped over and hurt my ankle, so that then I couldn't go out. And then it was cold and I didn't want to go out, and I had my lovely new house, and COVID was out there and it was horrible and I didn't want to go, and so I became a little bit claustrophobic, really. But happy. I knew I didn't want to go out of the house, but that was okay. I didn't want to, and I was happy to stay in. And that was my cousin who spoke to me that time, because she had pretty much a similar thing, and she started a Facebook group that got a little bit of publicity, actually, called Smile for a Mile. And the idea was that you went out of the house and walked and found something that made you smile. You only had to do a mile, but you had to find something that made you smile, and then you posted it on the Facebook group. And that went worldwide. And we raised money for mental health charities, doing sponsored miles, and actually promising her that I would go out and do a mile got me to do that. So that helped as well. So yeah, friends and family started talking about them. And missing those important distance relationships. So my cousin that I've just spoken about, she only lives in Northumberland. So we saw each other reasonably regularly before all of this. In fact, I was around her kitchen table where we were all going, all this COVID nonsense. I can't believe it's going to be like swine flu. I can't believe the fuss some people are making. And that was 2 weeks before they told the old folk they had to stay at home. So I hadn't seen her from then until spring this year. And that was weird. And there's other friends. We have just missed a holiday that we were supposed to go on, and I'll get to why in a bit. But my mum's from Suffolk, so all of that side of the family are down there, and that's where my granddad is, the one who's turned 100, and I haven't seen him for 2 years now, and I haven't seen any of them for 2 years now. And none of them getting any younger, and things like this make you realise that you don't know when you're going to lose folks, so that's hard. Not seeing them is hard. Not knowing how they are is hard. I mean, we're up here and they're down there, so we only saw each other about once or twice a year anyway, but to have missed that for 2 years, that's hard. My sister lives in London, and I haven't seen her since it would have been the February, the COVID February, January or February, pre-COVID. I haven't actually seen her in person. And we've done things like, Christmas Day, when we had our amnesty for just Nicola Sturgeon said we could still go ahead on Christmas Day and see one other family if we really must, and it was really risky and we really shouldn't. But my mum and dad just live in Edinburgh, so they came. And we set up a laptop at the other end of the table and had Christmas dinner with my sister. So we've done some other things like that as we've been through. We've had pub nights with my cousin and my sister and my mum and dad and stuff. So we've tried, but it's not the same, and it is hard. And then we've got a lot of our social group, but certainly our all our pre-children social group live all over the UK, and my best mates and the godchildren, the godparents of my daughter, one of them's in Dunbar, so we've been able to see her, but one of them's in Holland, and her boy, and I'm his godmum, he turns 18 next month, and I won't be able to go. And the other one's in London, and they've got a daughter who is 6 months younger than mine, and we've been raising them as cousins, and they haven't seen each other, and we haven't seen them, and it's just not the same. My birthday's in January, and my birthday this year, I got them all together and we did an online murder mystery party with a couple of other friends as well, and it was lovely. And that night was amazing. So we've had a couple of those. We've had that. We've done 2 murder mysteries, and we've done a Christmas party where we all picked a song, and then a friend of ours who's a sort of a graphic designer, she sort of put them all together like a TV show of the greatest Christmas hits, and we all watched that together. And we did something similar for the Eurovision, the first lockdown, because they did Eurovision this year, but they didn't the first year, 2021. And so we've done a few of those, but it's hard and it takes a lot of energy to put into that. And also particularly my friend, his Martin, and his wife Faye and their little daughter Emily, they've been having to become more insular as well because they've been struggling. He works in retail, so he's not stopped, and he's had the great unwashed come and cough on him all day, every day. And she's been furloughed, then not furloughed, and not really knowing what was going on. And yeah, so they've struggled, and they've had to just hanker down and batten down the hatches at times. So sometimes there's just no communication from them at all. And, you know, I mean, these were people we were flatmates with at one point when they were first a couple and we were a couple. And we've just always, we go on holidays together, all sorts of things, and we just haven't seen them. And it's just really, really hard. And, you know, even people who are close, sometimes we didn't see them. I said my parents are in Edinburgh, and for when we weren't allowed to cross county lines, you know, that was awful. We just couldn't see them. And my mum's got MS and she's not getting any better. She's every 6 months you can see she's taken a step down in how she is. And my dad's had to just get on with it. And you can't help but think that we won't get this time back. You know, it's why, even though it was a risk, they came here for Christmas Day, because it's like, well, what if she's not with it? I mean, she'll probably still be with us, but what if she's started to drift off and be even less herself and isn't really present, even though she's physically here by next Christmas? And again, COVID is taking time from us, and it's time we won't get back. But luckiness, good things. Luckiness of living in Dunbar. Dunbar had a great community. People were helping each other out. There was even before there was a formal sort of volunteering, looking after people, there was lots of informal stuff. And that sort of had to be taken over by the community council because people were just getting on and doing it and they wanted to coordinate it. I'm not sure why. And for all I'm complaining about supermarkets, that was whilst the advice was still very confusing and in the early days. When things have been clear, Dunbar has pretty much stuck by it. So up until very recently, we've been fine, and there's been little COVID actually in the town. And parents have helped each other out with informal childcare, because we were allowed to send our little ones into others' houses, even at times when we weren't allowed to, for informal childcare reasons. But also understanding, you know, people understanding each other's kind of, no, I'd rather not. And Lauderdale Park's been an absolute haven for that, and people looking after each other there. And I remember when the snows came and it was icy, and we were still going to the park for our cup of coffee and letting the children play, and we were taking turns digging out the ice so that the cafe owners could get on and serve the coffee. And again, we've got access to, again, and the community stuff I said, like the putting stones out for the kids and stuff. And the school's been great. I'm the chair of the parent council there, and they have just, as soon as there was a whiff of something that wasn't right and that parents were worried about, the head teacher was like, right, what can we do? do we need to have a meeting about this, or do people want to contact me individually? And they've, wherever the regulations have allowed, they have worked with us to make changes, and they've worked with us when we've had ideas of what we could do with the kids to make Christmas good, or to celebrate the end of term, even though we couldn't do that normally. Or, they've just been, the community's great. And then you've got the surrounding, I said before, I don't know what I'd do if I was in an inner city. We've got the beach, we've got the wood, we've got the countryside, and that was all accessible within your hour's walk. You could really mix it up. You didn't need to go the same way every day. It was just amazing. And we've got lots of facilities here as well. Having barely left the town now for however long, you've got the local baker and the local butcher, and you've got the park and the cafe, and the restaurants that started to do sort of take home food, and even the pubs who were doing take home booze at one point. There were and people wanted to, where they could, they wanted to support the local businesses. Obviously some people got caught in the redundancies and stuff, but it's just a great town for that, and it has felt like we could live in isolation within Dunbar. So we've been really, really lucky there. And some of the positives and things that we've done and learnt. So we learnt we could weather the weather. Before, we'd have all gone, oh no, it's too cold, we're off to the soft play. Or, oh, it's too cold, we're just not doing it today. But now, we sat out there in the park in the ice with our coffees, and we're like, actually, we're hardier than we thought we were. So learning that was good. And UK holidays, we've never been ones for big, like having to go abroad every year, or big beach holidays. But last year we booked a little shepherd's hut in the Borders, and we're going back again this year because it was my emergency holiday. It was like, we managed that last year when we only opened up for those few short weeks. We can do that this year if everything else falls apart, which it has done. So that's lucky. But I think a lot of other people have been discovering the joy of UK holidays, and the number of tourists in Dunbar. It was never a great... There were always tourists, but it was never sort of a destination, I don't think. But it feels like it's a bit more like that this year, and I think maybe that's what needed to happen, because the aviation industry and what's happening to the environment, I don't think we could have maintained, everybody going on foreign holidays by plane all the time. I don't think we can go back to that. So if we've maybe we'll do slightly less of them and slightly more UK holidays, I think that will be good. Working from home, I talked about how that was good. And something else we've done, because we needed to give Beth a peer in the house where she wasn't just here with the adults, we bought a dog. Well, we've rehomed a dog. He's retired. He used to be a stud. So he's 5'2", so he's very nearly the same age as our daughter. And I think I would have always kept going, oh no, I can't. Dogs are nice, but all think of the mess. But I haven't. I gave in, and he's come to live with us, and yeah, that's a great bonus, and that's great for our family. And so I guess the end of the story is, despite having been very cautious, and despite following all the regulations, and despite everything, as we've just had this peak now, and suddenly East Lothian became the worst place in Scotland, and Scotland was the worst place in Europe, and we had... a lot of it seemed to centre around the kids, but we had a cult. Beth was still going to school, and she went to a school party with some of her friends, although it was outside, and she was still having play dates, and they felt safe enough and it was all fine, and then she caught COVID. And we didn't realise she caught COVID until she gave it to me. And I tested myself on the eve of our holiday to go and see my relatives down south, and then to see our friends that I talked about we used to live with their daughter and everything. And I tested myself the night before and we realised I had COVID and I couldn't go. So in some respects that's really lucky that we had access to the test and that we did that. But in other respects, I didn't get to see the people I wanted to see. And instead I got to be quite sick in bed for 5 days. So I'm really glad that I've had both my vaccines. So it doesn't bear thinking about what that would have been like without them. And then because we all live on top of each other, my husband then proceeded to catch COVID. So, and he's just recovering now. Today has been his first day where he got up and had a shower and got dressed. So he's getting better as well. He only had 3 days in bed, so he's not that it's a competition, but so there we are. I guess that's the end so far. I don't know what will happen next. We're going to have to realign our thinking because we've both been vaccinated and we've both had COVID. So actually, for the next few months at least, we really can't get it again. So, I mean, I don't want to go crazy. And I'll still wear a mask and follow all the regulations, but hopefully this will be an opportunity for me to get my head round. To get my head round it all and stop the anxiety. And get used to living with COVID. So there we are.